The unique and polished movement in Apex is arguably the #1 reason it stands out from any other game right now. And I'm guessing it may even be the reason why some of you guys watching are still playing it. But as fun as it is to use movement in this game, it raises the question that I'm sure you've probably wondered before. Is movement actually useful in Apex? I've heard many takes on this over the years, such as this popular one from Imperial Hal.
Usually, this is how I see it. When it comes to like super gliding and like wall bouncing and shit like that, those are things that you use to try to run away from a player, right? And in that regard, you already lost the fight.
This debate has also had many others thinking, could some of the best movement players in the game go pro? And if so, then why don't they? To further understand this, in this video, I'm going to break down Apex's 3 most popular game modes, pubs, ranked, and comp to see how much movement actually plays a role in them. Pubs is without a doubt the place where movement gets utilized the most in Apex, and for obvious reason. There are zero stakes here, and you get so much freedom to experiment because when you die, you're easily back into another match just a minute later. And it's through this freedom, I think, that players over the years have been able to find ways to effectively utilize movement. For example, take LEMMiNO, who was able to turn super glides and lurches into a brand new aggressive playstyle with Octane. Or a more classic example, Faide, who's been able to turn zipline buildings into the best 1v3 location on the entire map. By simply watching some of the best movement players in the game, you can obviously tell that movement is incredibly useful in pubs. But there's also many other factors as to why movement can be so dominant. Unlike ranked or comp, pub queues can be very random sometimes, giving you either a lot of good players, bad players, or a mix of both. So how do we then know how useful movement is against each skill level? To find this out, we've got to look at ranked, where skill level is more consistent and easier to compare. Over the last few years, I've done several solo to masters and duo to masters challenges, basically working my way up from the lowest rank bronze to the second highest masters. And I've noticed that the first few ranks, bronze, silver, gold, and even plat, have all had a surprising amount of movement potential. The main reason for this is the fact that many of the lower ranked players lack fundamental skills such as game sense, mechanics, and aim to punish movement mistakes. Even just this, in my opinion, can easily become an overwhelming advantage for you in these early ranks. And for these reasons, I think that any movement player with just solid mechanics has what it takes to climb through platinum and into D4. But how does this change as we go higher into the ranks? The first rank that can really hit you hard as a movement player is Diamond, because a very important movement skill gets introduced into these lobbies, which is game sense. Simply put, what you'll learn the most when climbing through Diamond as a movement player is not what movement techs you're using, but how and why you're using them. For example, if you're a movement player dropping pylon, you'll more than likely want to utilize the zip lines there in some way. But there's going to be a very clear difference now between when you're just spamming them randomly and when you're using them correctly, because the players that use their movement with purpose are going to be the ones that see the most results in these higher lobbies. So now let's say you finally reach masters as a movement player. What happens next? Are you just cooked? Well, not really. If you do a simple YouTube search, you can see that movement players like Faide, Ecstasy, and LEMMiNO are consistently outperforming other players in pred lobbies. So it becomes clear that they're doing something right that other movement players aren't. The thing is, once you reach masters, it becomes very difficult to climb to pred without a full package of strong game sense, mechanics, and aim. Because movement is so mechanics focused, a lot of movement players that are stuck in high diamond or low masters fail to fully develop the other two. And this is where the shift starts to happen. Movement is no longer a big reason you win games, but rather a tool that can support parts of your gameplay. Now you need to also focus on other aspects of the game, whether it's team fighting, rotates, or end zones. And if you're only comfortable inside a zipline building, then you clearly aren't preparing yourself for this level of gameplay. But now comes the question I'm sure you've all been wondering. If movement is still viable in pred lobbies, then how useful would it be in a competitive setting? Since I lack a lot of comp experience, I decided to personally ask Lyric, one of the best movement players in the game, the same question. For reference, Lyric has briefly competed professionally before in the early days of Apex and has an approximate earning count of $14,000. Here was his response. Do you think movement has any use in high-level Apex? Yes, to a certain extent, in pro play it only really matters once your level of game sense is either on par or better than anyone you're fighting / playing against. If you're behind on game sense, it won't really matter at all. His answer ties back perfectly to what I mentioned in the diamond section earlier. Pretty much any and all movement you would want to use in comp would have to make perfect sense for that scenario. Do anything extra and you'll probably die for it, but if you utilize it correctly, you can create small advantages in your fights. I then asked him a more personal follow-up question. What has stopped / not made you want to go pro in Apex, and does it have anything to do with movement? I played pro Apex for a little while because I liked the possibility of having movement being a determining factor in fighting even if it wasn't the main reason. Early comp Apex had this because it was mostly M and K players and people were prone to missing when you outplayed people with movement. And this right here in popular FPS is somewhat rare, so it had my attention for a bit. I never liked BRs even before Apex because of its slow nature and emphasis on just surviving, but I was willing to let it slide just because of how Apex fighting was. But as time went on, it first got slower and slower due to people wanting to min-max winning and killing, and a rise of awareness around aim assist being strong made movement much less plausible. In an era of competitive Apex where controller is dominant, efficiency is more important than anything. Imperial Hal, who is practically the face of Apex comp, switched the controller a few years back and has even said that he would rather quit the game than swap back. And it was at around this point where Lyric himself probably had to make the same decision. Strip the creativity and freedom from his gameplay or start a new journey for himself elsewhere. I wanted to be known for mechanics because I knew they were exceptional, but not at the price of being underrated, which I figured would happen to me if I continued pro play. So I pivoted to content to try and flex the cool part of Apex to me. Basically the mechanical diff you could do to people. Being the best or even better player, but less flashy, just didn't appeal to me because in the past I've seen less benefit from that. I had spent like 5 years of being underrated before this, so I wanted the spotlight. Part of the thrill and excitement some of us get from this game is the freedom to use movement, even if it's not the most optimal or efficient thing to do. And that gets me thinking, maybe these are the same reasons why most other top movement players don't want to go pro either. It's not that they're not talented enough, but rather because they'll leave behind the version of Apex that they fell in love with. At the end of the day though, the vast majority of movement players watching this will probably never want to go pro in Apex, so it doesn't really matter. But for those of you that do want to, then you'll probably have similar experiences. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, I hope you learned something new.